exposición, en colaboración con líderes de múltiples sectores globales para lograr una educación equitativa. Se suman a este esfuerzo también Sandra Carmen Rodríguez, la Manjaliwarma, la recibimos con en la Universidad Católica del Perú, cuenta con 15 años de experiencia laboral en desarrollo social, coordinaciones interinstitucionales y con las instancias de gobierno y grandes. Cuenta con y monitoreo de proyectos de desarrollo. En el panel, y nuevamente los aplausos para el Aníbal Velázquez, políticas públicas del Programa Mundial de Mujeres, que será el nuevo valor de esta primera presentación.
Bien, primero los expertos que hemos por mucho tiempo atrás, el Programa Mundial de Alimentos, una agenda de trabajo con el gobierno peruano y en particular apoyar el programa de Jaliwarma en el Perú. Y la propuesta es justamente cómo hacer que el programa pueda aprovechar de estas evidencias científicas, de estas experiencias que han mostrado, tienen que funcionar para poder tener Carmen Urbano, que es ahora la directora global de alimentación escolar del Programa Mundial de Alimentos aquí en Perú. Justamente esta publicación que lo que se ha trabajado en los últimos años en este mundial, publicaciones donde siempre que las a raíz de eso ha permitido dar evidencia científica como en esta, y luego puede ahora mostrar esa intervención que se hace en intervenciones efectivas puede retornar en beneficio del país. Tenemos la suerte de tener al editor de esta publicación. Justamente va a ser la presentación de este libro, y lo más importante es que se hace un análisis que tiene la salud en el capital humano, pero también se identifican.
Those of us who are parents all know that in late adolescence our children suddenly change, their characters suddenly change. Something a lot of Hollywood are based on, I think. Those big changes are real changes in how the brain structure is working. This is the time health issues first arrive, and mental ill health. We start to establish behaviors which will be lifelong. So here then, another crucial time during the development of us, and during our development as people, when we really need to be caring for our children in a very precise way, caring about their diet, caring about their behavior, caring about how we treat them. So this is the, and obviously I'm but this is the important message, that we're seeing several vulnerable points, not just during the first 1,000 days, but also at times during early schooling, at times around the time of puberty, the brain development characteristics of adolescence. The message is that we need to invest benefits, to keep those benefits going throughout life into adulthood, to develop ourselves, to develop our children into the best adult they can become, to develop their full potential. We need to continue that investment. And that's, I think, the most important message in terms of thinking about human capital. So how do we make sure we achieve that development? Well, we can use, this is actually a World Bank graph showing the same age range, birth to 20 years of age, and it's looking at, when you're in school. It's clear that the school and the preschool periods can be an excellent platform for reaching children throughout that phase, and for delivering many different kinds of important interventions to help those children progress. And so, does that mean I've got to finish? And so, having thought about these analyses, we had to come up with some solutions, and these are the solutions. One package identified for children from 5 to 14 years, the sort of primary school age package, and then another package for adolescent children. These are packages where we could find excellent cost effectiveness, right? Packages of excellent cost effectiveness. But of course, no one is suggesting the same package for the whole world. Different packages for different countries, different packages for different parts of the same country. But anyway, the concept is that there are ways that we can respond to this. And here's this sort of generic package idea. Here we have, this is for low-income countries, this is for lower middle-income countries, so this is, again, the lower end of the income spectrum. Different sorts of interventions around vision and eye health, interventions around dental health, interventions around vaccination and deworming, and also interventions around school feeding. And I want to make 2 points here. First, all of these interventions are very cost effective. These are chosen because they're cost effective. Secondly, that school feeding turns out to be one of the most expensive of those packages. It's still cost effective, but it is one of the most expensive because, of course, feeding somebody every day is very different from giving them a single vaccination, so the costs are different. But we make the point very specifically in our analysis that this is cost effective and that school feeding is worth doing. And I'm going to now talk a little bit more about why school feeding is particularly an essential part of that. If we look at in the world, we look at those countries which are low income or lower middle income, so the poorer countries in the world, and we look at how much they spend a year on children under 5, the figure is about 29 billion US dollars. That's the global figure for children under 5 that we spend mainly on their health. If we look at children between 5 and 20 years of age, we spend something around $3 billion on their health. Very much less. Very much less. Over these 5 years, we spend 29 billion. Over these 15 years, we spend about 3 billion on their health. But on their education, the world spends about $210 billion. So we recognize immediately that the global investment in education in these years, from 5 to 20, is far greater than investment in health. In fact, we've stopped investing significantly in health in children over 5. There's a misalignment here, because clearly, if health matters to education, then we need to leverage those $210 billion. So, the principal messages I want to make here are that we absolutely need to secure the initial investments in 1,000 days, but we need to continue to invest for about 8,000 days. We need to make sure we care about our children over 5. We need to look at these investments in a way with an essential package to help us to address that. I want to just give you an example of a country that's done exactly that, and that country is China. China has a problem. China has a problem that it has very poor children in the west of China. I should say had a problem. Very poor children in the west of China because their parents all left the west to work in the factories in the east. The factories are all along the coast in the east. So the parents would leave their children behind so-called left behind children. They set up this program for the left behind children. When we piloted the program 10 years ago, their pilot program was 20 million children, and today their program covers 44 million children, the poorest children in China. And this is a program that you see has all of the early interventions, but it also brings together a package of later interventions with the idea that a child that's born achieves full capacity to then have a job. That's the concept. From birth to being employed, to being an active part of the society. This is a model that China has employed with great success. They recognize this as having strong economic returns, something well worth paying for. I included this because sometimes people doubt that health matters for education. What this is a bubble, so-called bubble graph. So the size of these bubbles indicates the sort of level of importance of an intervention. The blue bubbles are based on financing. The green bubbles are based on education, and the red bubbles are based on health. And the message here is, and the outcome we're measuring is education outcomes. And the message here is we need to make investments in education to improve education, but we also need to invest in the economics of the community, and we need to invest in the health of the community. All of these things, all of these different sectors are vital to children getting a full education. The same message you all had in thinking about early child development with the multi-sectoral approach. Then. This year, the World Bank launched its project called Human Capital, in which they looked at different countries throughout the world and measured what the value or the future value of their human population would be to those countries. The key message here is actually this one. That in rich countries, 70% of the wealth of the country comes from the human population, of us working, us coming up with good ideas, us being entrepreneurs. That's where the wealth of the country comes from. And yet in poor countries, it's only about 40% of the wealth. This means two things. First, those countries are not taking advantage of their people. They're wasting one of their most important resources. Secondly, it means that the people in the country are not themselves achieving their full potential. So let me just say that again. This means that countries that are not investing in the health and development of their people are depriving the people of their real opportunities in life, but they're also depriving the country of a very important source of investment. So human capital is a very good way of thinking about how countries should spend their resources. And obviously the point we're making here is that investing in your people is a crucial part of that resource, and that investing in their health and in their development through a school-based school feeding program with other health interventions, a package based in the schools, is a very good way of contributing to human capital. And it's, I think I'll just point out here, this is the graph that the World Bank provided. It divided the world into different quartiles, and the third quartile is the one in green. The second quartile is here in yellow, and obviously the top quartile is here in blue. What I'm saying is that this area, so some countries in this part of the world are doing much worse than others, but it's also clear that investing in human capital is something that those countries also should be looking at. We can talk more about that if that's helpful. And I want to make the point that that's not just the view of the World Bank, that now the USAID has published a report which specifically talks about maximizing human capital, and that it's the role of both health and education, also, of course, social inclusion and development, agriculture, and many other ministries to achieve that. So to try and take that forward is why we're launching today this book, which is called Reimagining School Feeding, a high return investment on human capital and on local economies. And I just would point out that Carmen Bourbano has written who was the World Food Programme head of office here. She led the writing of the prologue, which describes what this book's about. I should also highlight here Arlene Mitchell, who is with us, and Leslie Drake. So this is a book focusing specifically on how do you pull together this package for the development of children. And to finish, I want to emphasize four specific points. When we invest in school feeding and school health and the development of our children, when we think of our children as from in the womb through till their 21st birthday, we think of our children in that way, then there are four benefits that we can expect. Benefits which are benefits of human capital, which I've talked about most, but also social protection benefits, and I want to talk about that for a moment. Also, economic investments in the rural area, agricultural returns, and also peace building as a key investment. So if we talk about investment first in people, so that's the topic I've been focusing on. Human capital is the key return that we see from our investment through school feeding and school health. So investing in our children, not only under fives, but now to include the 5 through to 20-year-olds, that can be, that's a crucial benefit we see from our investment. The second is this issue of social protection. And I want to tell two stories here. In 2009, the World Bank set up a crisis fund when the prices of food spiked and the world started to go into recession. We all here in this room remember that moment, I suspect. The World Bank set up a crisis fund, and it asked countries what did they want to use the money for. Did they want to use money to buy more food, for example, or to reduce the price of food? And the answer was that many of those countries, many countries throughout the world, chose to use the money to provide school feeding programs for their children or to expand their school feeding programs. And they did that because the school feeding was providing social protection. It was a way of reaching right into the community and giving the food directly to the children that needed it. It was a social protection program. And that's a message that's taken, I think, 10 years for people in development to learn, is that school feeding is often the only and one of the best social protection programs for poor children, particularly poor rural or poor urban children. And that's not just for poor countries, because what happened in Europe during the recession, the economic recession, was Spain, Italy, my home country of Scotland, all of those countries also started intensifying school feeding. Many of them opened their school feeding programs throughout the summer vacation, throughout the vacation in those countries, so that the poor children would still be fed. It's very important, I think, to realize that social protection role that school feeding can play. In fact, in Britain, when Britain set up its benefit scheme in 1999, 1906, the beginning of the 20th century, when it first started a social benefit scheme, the first thing it did was provide school feeding. So this issue of social protection is a very important aspect of school feeding that we shouldn't forget. It's very important for our poor communities. I think Madame the Minister really spoke about that at the beginning today. And then the issue of economic investment. And I want to just talk there about the idea of buying the food for school feeding from the communities that are being fed. If you do that, you're injecting the money for the school feeding purchases into those rural communities, those poor communities that need the money the most. It also establishes stable markets to feed the people in those communities. So school feeding can be a very important way of encouraging markets in the countries themselves. One of the examples that perhaps Leslie Drake on the platform may talk about, or Arlene Mitchell, will be maybe about Nigeria, where Nigeria now sells, the people of Nigeria sell 6.8 million eggs every week to the school feeding program. And you don't need a big farm to produce eggs. So it's just an example of how the money can go back into the communities. And I know Brazil, for example, has 30% of its school feeding, its food for school feeding has to be bought within the area of the school. So that can be a huge difference. And let me give you another example. I'm going to choose again to talk about Nigeria, just because of the scale, that school feeding programs can employ people and make a huge difference. In Nigeria, they decided that they would only employ women to provide meals for children. Women work, market women usually, and they now have 95,000 market women that have a reliable job providing cooking the food for the school children. By the way, at the weekends, they use the same pots and pans to cook food for weddings and for birthdays, and so they've become entrepreneurs. It's just an example, simply, of this issue, that there can be a big economic input from providing the food for your children. The final point is one that's about peace building, is one that's tragically very common today. Much of the Middle East, think of Syria, think of Lebanon, and so forth, countries that, we think about Yemen, countries that actually are quite rich countries, but which now are so affected by war that they need these kinds of programs to achieve some level of stability. So that's become important. So this is, again, me just wanting to make the point that one program of school feeding plus a program of investing in the health and development of your children, investing in their education, that one program has all these benefits of human capital development, of social protection, of agriculture and other macroeconomic gains, and also in some countries of peace building. All of those come from that same single investment. And so it's very important then that I leave you with what I think are two important thoughts. This is a reimagining of why we do school feeding. This isn't just about school meals anymore. It's about not just making children fitter or less hungry. It's about helping children become the best adults they can become, realizing their full potentials in life, creating a more productive society. And secondly, it's not just about food, that this is the business of health, of education, social protection, of agriculture, of many of the private sector. There are many components to this, all of which don't just help feed children, but actually help build the nation. So our new image of school feeding is as an investment in children, an investment in young people, that is also an investment in the future, and I hope in the future of Peru. Thank you very much indeed.
Muchas gracias. Una excelente presentación. Ahora tenemos la participación de nuestros panelistas. Arlene Mitchell va a tener la oportunidad de comentar la presentación que nos hizo el profesor. Por favor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very, very happy to be here today. I want to thank the organizers for all of the hard work that they have put into this effort, and to congratulate Peru for the kind of review and open dialogue that you're having about this very, very important program. Not a lot of countries do this kind of dialogue about their school meal program, and so I think this is an excellent example to take forward to other countries. I want to make a couple of very specific comments on Dr. Bundy's presentation. He said that school feeding is not just about food, and I think he gave us some excellent examples of that. He said that brain development has kind of been left out of our thinking until recently, and I think this data about when in life our brain really develops and we become mature human beings in the concept of the brain development is extremely important. We have focused largely on physical growth when we've talked about nutrition and school meal programs in the past. So the idea of finding how to best nourish the brain and its development is a relatively new concept for us in the school feeding field. He talked also about investing in communities and employing members of the community as part of an economic investment that I think has often been underestimated in school meal programs in the past. I've worked in this arena for about 20 years, and in the early years started asking, how many people are you employing in your school meal program? How many farmers are actually selling food to the program? How is that impacting communities in terms of economic benefits back to the communities, not just giving the child food and reducing the cost to parents of feeding their children, but are we actually creating an economic environment, an ecosystem around the school meal program that is sustaining the program and developing the community over time? The interesting thing about school feeding to me is, and its biggest power comes from the fact that it is multi-sectoral. You aren't just getting an educational benefit. You're not just getting a nutrition benefit. You're not just getting an agricultural benefit. You're not just adding very basic, helpful health interventions to your school meal program. It is really the fact that they all come together in this one program and you get these multiple benefits that is the strength of the school meal program. That said, that's also the biggest challenge of school meal programs. How do you get your Minister of Rural Development, your Minister of Agriculture, your Minister of Health, your Minister of Education, etc.? How do you get these programs to work together? Who leads it? Who has to pay for it? Who gets the credit for it? How do you bring those different sectors and different skill sets together to strengthen the program? How do you target to the children in a country like Peru with 48 recognized ethnic groups? How do you get the food that they appreciate and is nutritious for them to them at the right age, in a safe condition, etc.? Very challenging. How do you diversify the diet? The simplest thing to feed children is just to give them a bowl of fortified porridge, for example, which in the worst circumstances is still good, fortified porridge. But who wants to eat a fortified porridge every day? Or the same meal every day? And is that the healthiest thing for children? No, we need fresh fruits, we need fresh vegetables, we need animal protein, we need that diversity of the diet. But that makes school feeding very challenging if you're trying to have a diversified diet. In a country like Peru, in the United States even, we have a triple burden of malnutrition. We have those that don't have enough food, we have those that are obese, and we have those that have enough food but have the wrong kind of food, so the actual micronutrient composition of their diet is inadequate. So this triple burden of nutrition needs has made life extremely complicated. There are those who say, you know, we shouldn't be feeding children at school because they might become obese. There are those who say, no, we need to feed children who are hungry, but the other children don't need it. We need to know whether we're targeting anemia or a vitamin A deficiency in the diet. And these aspects complicate school meal programs. Linking to local agriculture has been extremely difficult, but also extremely successful. Don mentioned the experience in Brazil of buying locally, in Nigeria buying locally. Hugely important to local development, but it raises challenges of how do you ensure the food is safe, for example. How do you ensure that the purchasing in a decentralized manner is working and is not corrupt? There are lots of challenges to it, and yet this local investment in agriculture is hugely important to the sustainability of the program. Linking to key health interventions, really exciting to have global consensus now that schools are an excellent platform to introduce very basic health interventions. Deworming being a very easy, inexpensive health intervention. Hand washing with soap, so that children learn to wash their hands before they eat. Hugely important, not expensive. Doing dental exams and vision exams at school, extremely helpful to identify why children might not be learning or what kind of help they might need to be able to learn better. Working with the private sector, hugely difficult. Government and private sector partnerships, you don't find a lot of successful stories in that area. We talk about it a lot, and we find all kinds of challenges. Companies that don't want to work with governments because they don't trust them, or the minister changes every 6 months, or it takes too long to get paid, or, I mean, there's just a list of issues that keep corporations suspicious of working with governments. On the other hand, we have corporations who have pushed sugar, salt, fat inappropriately. We have corporations that have been corrupt, and bribery scandals and fraud and other kinds of issues. But if we don't involve our private sector, we're not, again, building our own economic ecosystem around school meals. There are a couple of examples, South Africa and Namibia, for example, that have done pretty well at setting policies for working with the private sector, and some good examples of how it can work. Reaching adolescence. Don emphasized this very importantly in his remarks. And I think it's something that we tend to forget, that children above age about 10, 12 years old need serious attention, not just on their nutrition, but also on preparing them to be parents in the future. And incorporating education into the school meal program, education about nutrition, education about hygiene, education about how to become a parent, is challenging, and not many countries do it very well. Finally, what we're really hoping for is long-term behavior change in our children, and our children teaching their parents and their own children, and when they become parents themselves, better nutrition and health and hygiene practices. Behavior change is a very, very tough nut to crack, and we don't have the solutions for behavior change, but we do know that children are major players in the idea of, if you think about key interventions around quitting smoking, for example, it's largely been children talking to their parents that have gotten parents to quit smoking. Children learn to recycle, and children learn to take care of the environment, and they take these lessons home with them, and they carry it on when they become parents themselves. So we think school children are a key nexus for behavior change. So to wrap it up, I just want to say there's no other program in my experience other than school meal programs that have this kind of a potential for touching on 4 key elements of development: nutrition, education, agriculture, and health. And while they're touching on all of those areas, they're also creating economic opportunities and development. So I really congratulate Peru for spending the kind of time and attention on how to make the program stronger, and I hope to work with you in the future as you make progress. Thank you very much.
Seguidamente tenemos la participación de la doctora Leslie Drake para que nos haga sus comentarios, por favor.
Buenos días. That is the end of my Spanish. This is my first trip to Peru, so I'm so excited to be here. It's a particular passion of mine.
The microphone.
Is that better? Did you hear any of that? Okay, so coming back to adding on to Don's excellent presentation and the reflections of Aline, a lot of the thinking is the same from my perspective as well, but I was thinking that I'd just focus on some key issues that maybe we could explore in the Q&A session later. First of all, about coordination. School feeding has multi-sectors involved, and how do we get those sectors working together efficiently and effectively? Then I also want to talk about integration, and can we take the school feeding platform and add on other health benefits? For example, we were talking about deworming. You know, for a few pennies more, you can feed the children, not the worms, for example. And then I also want to talk about this whole concept of health and nutrition education, because I think it's vital. And one of the experiences from the field for me has been when we're looking at making the school feeding program contextually relevant. So what happens in the north of Peru, east of Peru, 48 different tribal languages, all of that has to be locally adapted and accepted by the communities. But you have to have, you know, the basic standards, and there are global standards that look at what an effective school health or an effective school feeding program can have, and then look at what we can do locally to make sure that is correct. Don was mentioning Nigeria, and if you go back to coordination, one of the key things I think is you need high-level political commitment. And in China, the Politburo is responsible for school feeding. And so all of the sectors come together under the Politburo. In Nigeria, the vice president himself has made it part of his passion and his flagship program for school feeding, but also the social investment program, which has 5 projects within the program in Nigeria. School feeding is the biggest, and it's a $137 million investment by the government. And when you get the power of a vice president behind a program, then you define the roles of the Ministry of Health, the roles of the Ministry of Education, agriculture. In Nigeria, there's also Women and Child Affairs and local government. So you have 5 different sectors, and you're all supposed to coordinate and across the whole country, like Nigeria. It's crazy. But if you define those roles and allocate the budget, and you have the leader, then, in the case of Nigeria, that's the vice president, then you have a system. You have a political leadership system and also a technical committee. So then health knows what it needs to invest in the program. Education knows what it needs to invest. How do you dialogue with the local government? These are the communities we're trying to engage with. And I think in Nigeria is a perfect example of going from 0.6 million children being fed 4 years ago to 9.3 million children now being fed daily. And all of the food that is produced for the school feeding program is locally produced. Now, one of the things I think we need to get away from this local or homegrown. No one can seem to come up with a different explanation. But if you, in Nigeria, there's 36 states in Nigeria, but you can get the protein components, the tonnage of fish needed from different states, but it's still Nigeria. It's an investment in the rural economies of Nigeria. And I think what we've seen is, even when you look across the different menus in the different states, it might look different, but the 30% RDA, and also the different components that you need in that menu are all provided by local produce, whatever that might be. And I think with that coordination at all the different levels, so you have to go down to, if this works at the federal level, you have to make it work at the state level with the same players, the same partners, and then at the implementation level. So who are those players? How do we identify who we need to, who needs to be part of that technical committee to make these decisions? And who holds the budgets? And also on the budgets, who is responsible for accounting for those budgets? So having an element of monitoring and evaluation, not just on the food, but also on the financial management of the program is also critical. And then the other thing that I would just like to add is, when the Madam Minister this morning was talking about health, nutrition and education and the value of that. And one of the stories we've got from many countries is that the kids who learn why they're eating what they're eating go home and do change the values of their parents. And there's this beautiful little diagram where you've got a little man that fills up with different colours on what he's been fed or she's been fed in school that day. And the kids are going home with this visual concept of what they've been fed at school, and they're saying, "Mum, you're not giving me enough green here, and why are you throwing those leaves away? That's not poor man's food. It's actually rich in vitamin A." And a classic story about vitamin A is the conversion to orange flesh sweet potato across Africa 100% of the vitamin A daily allowance for kids is with one portion of the orange flesh sweet potato. And the kids now recognise that and know it, and then see what their nutrients are, and what their parents should be giving them additionally. And one of the things that happened, especially with the parent-teachers associations, they're coming back to the school, and first of all complaining that you're giving these wild, crazy ideas to children, but bringing the community back into the discussion about what healthy eating is and how to keep the kids well nourished has gone in leaps and bounds in terms of how the community actually engages. And when we're looking at the homegrown piece, we're actually seeing a difference in not just attendance and retention, but also in achievement indicators. So a randomized controls trial in Ghana showed a difference not in just the access indicators in education, but also in achievements in numeracy and literacy. They were significant, but not astounding, but this is 2 to 3 years of watching the cycle, and especially with the girls. And so the girls are no longer in the field, and the parents are being paid by the government to provide the food that the kids go back to school. They're not in the fields anymore, they're in the school being fed food that the parents have already been paid by the government to provide. So it's the concept of a win-win. You know, everyone's a winner if the parents, children and the school work together. I think the one thing that the Madam Minister this morning was also mentioning was this concept of school health and nutrition. And so, can we use the school feeding platform as a way of adding on other investments and other health interventions? I mentioned deworming earlier, but there's also things like using the teachers to help children self-refract. And we're seeing in many countries now that the help of the teachers for children to self-refract is actually as good as going to an optometrist in the city, that they, even if they can get to the city, they can't then afford the glasses that will be provided by them. So this self-refraction technique is actually delivering glasses on spec in the schools at the time of prognosis, diagnosis. And so there's many things that you can put together for a school health program. And I don't know if you know about the Focusing Resources on Effective School Health framework, the FRESH framework. It was launched in Dakar in 2000, and since has been adopted by many, many countries to look at a basic framework for what an effective school health program can look like. And it varies, no one size fits all, whatever. And you might, for example, if you have no worms in the country, why would you deworm, for example? But it's a way of looking at the different components in a structured and framed way. And it's maybe something that you might want to consider in terms of adopting a more holistic, integrated package to school health, using the school feeding as the basic platform for adding on those different interventions. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think Don and Eileen covered most of the bases, so it'd be great to hear back from you guys about what you think. Thank you.
Bien, ahora tenemos la participación de Sandra Cárdenas, directora ejecutiva del Programa Nacional de Alimentación Escolar del Cuarto.
Buenos días con todos y con todas. Es un gusto estar aquí el día de hoy compartiendo estas reflexiones, y mientras Donald y Leslie y Arlen hacían comentarios sobre cómo hemos puesto un foco importante en la primera infancia, que es importante, sigue siendo importante. Pensaba en una historia de un niño que le pregunta a su papá diariamente, en la mañana, mira al cielo y le dice: ¿qué es eso que brilla tan reluciente y resplandeciente cada día? Y el padre le dice: el sol. Y en la noche el niño le vuelve a hacer la pregunta y le dice: ¿qué es eso que brilla tan radiante en la noche? Son estrellas y son varias. Entonces le explica que el sol también es una estrella. Y este sol es la primera infancia en la que nuestro país ya está comprometido. Ya no queda dudas que la primera infancia es importante y es importante hacer esta inversión. Pero entonces ahora nos toca empezar a mirar a estas estrellas que están un poco más lejos, que es completar estos 8.000 días de atención en nuestro país. Entonces ese es el primer punto que yo quería traer esta mañana en mis comentarios, porque consideramos que sí es importante empezar a mirar, tal como ya se ha mencionado, tal como ya lo mencionó Hetman, en cómo es que tenemos esta tasa de retorno económico y social por cada dólar que invertimos en la primera infancia. Posteriormente, por supuesto, que está medido. Y lo que nos dice él es que es más o menos entre 7 y 5 dólares de ahorro en salud y en otros aspectos importantes para el desarrollo de algo que también hemos compartido el día de hoy, que es el capital humano. Entonces, sí, nos queda claro que necesitamos seguir mirando la política pública en nuestro país para garantizar estos derechos fundamentales en nuestra infancia y en nuestra adolescencia, para tener, obviamente, ciudadanos y ciudadanas que lleguen a una adultez con todos estos derechos plenos garantizados y tengamos, obviamente, estas experiencias tan valiosas que hemos compartido en esta investigación tan importante, tan seria y tan valiosa que tenemos el gusto de compartir con quienes han escrito estas páginas, rescatando estas experiencias a nivel internacional. Y hay algunos capítulos y experiencias que han tomado también de Perú. Entonces, decir que efectivamente la protección social tiene muchos beneficios para nuestra población, tampoco tenemos duda, ¿no? Y estos beneficios obviamente tienen esta mirada en lo que es la inversión del capital social, y ahora nos abocamos un poquito más en el tema de las escuelas. Y las escuelas son vistas también por nosotros como espacios o ventanas de oportunidades. Estas ventanas que se abren a generar, en primer lugar, un ejercicio pleno de derechos que tienen nuestros estudiantes, que es a tener una educación, obviamente una salud, y también una protección a través del sistema alimentario o del programa de alimentación escolar que tiene nuestro país. Y esta protección social, por supuesto, que permite este despliegue de todas las capacidades físicas, psíquicas, emocionales de cada uno de nuestros ciudadanos y ciudadanas. Entonces, ese círculo virtuoso que también nos ha presentado Donald, que hace mucho sentido efectivamente con lo que no solo el Perú sino muchos otros países están ya implementando. Es tener como centro el tema de la protección social a través de los servicios alimentarios en la escuela, que efectivamente nos permiten el desarrollo del capital humano en salud, en educación y nutrición, ¿no? Y allí también nos hace la reflexión de cómo contribuyen los países ricos con un 70% versus un 40% de los países pobres, ¿no? Entonces, aquí tenemos que empezar a mirar como una oportunidad relevante esta gran oportunidad en las escuelas y a través de los servicios alimentarios. El tema también de la inversión, que también es importante mencionarlo, 210 billones para educación versus 4 billones para salud y nutrición en este grupo etario que va desde los 5 hasta los 19 años. Y que claramente Donald ha definido que son como que dos grandes bloques, ¿no? Un primer bloque de atención o grupo de atención de 5 a 14 años y el segundo de 15 a 19, mirando también las características específicas de cada uno de estos grupos etarios. Y entonces eso nos lleva a tener que pensar que no hay una sola forma, sino que hay muchas formas de atención en este escenario tan complejo que tiene nuestro país, ¿no? Ya nos mencionaban también que es algo distinto irse al norte del Perú, que irse a la selva y que irse a las zonas altoandinas. Efectivamente, así es nuestro país, diverso, complejo, y también tenemos nosotros que ir acompañando esta diversidad social y cultural, ¿no? Entonces siempre hablamos de la transversalidad del enfoque cultural y la pertinencia cultural, que no es lo mismo, pero tenemos que ir con esa mirada, ¿verdad? El tema también que nos parecía muy relevante es estas redes de seguridad social. Cómo en esta ventana de oportunidades que es la escuela se va tejiendo esta red de protección y se le va dando efectivamente educación, un piso básico de salud, como lo mencionaban también, y otros beneficios adicionales, ¿no? Y además, en esta red de seguridad que se constituye en las escuelas, promover, por supuesto, no solamente hábitos alimenticios, sino que los niños empiecen a ser estos agentes de cambio, no solamente con sus pares, con sus compañeros dentro de las aulas, sino también ser ese vehículo de cambio con las familias. Y lo que se quiere trabajar también allí es con toda esta comunidad educativa, en este trabajo articulado que también se ha mencionado, intersectorial, y también mirar cómo el director de la escuela, los docentes de la escuela y los padres de familia ponen en relevancia el desarrollo de los niños, niñas y adolescentes y se vinculan con este esfuerzo conjunto. El tema del esfuerzo va de ida y vuelta. Lo que el Estado tiene para garantizar los derechos para nuestros ciudadanos y ciudadanas y lo que los ciudadanos también están en la capacidad y en la posibilidad de responder. Entonces, esto hace que todos nos sintamos no solamente sujetos de derechos, sino también sujetos de deberes. ¿Cómo contribuyo yo también al desarrollo de mi hijo, de mi hija, de mi comunidad, de mi escuela? Y mirando también en esta construcción de paz y estabilidad. Somos niños bien cuidados, bien alimentados, con mejoras en sus logros de aprendizajes, en espacios que además son seguros, en espacios donde son escuchados, donde son atendidos en toda su diversidad. Por supuesto que también estamos mostrando cómo ser adultos que escuchan, adultos que conversan y dialogan, y se les permite también una voz y una opinión respecto a cómo ellos también se van sintiendo, ¿no? Y eso nos hace pensar y reflexionar también en cómo es la entrega del servicio alimentario. Bueno, nosotros estamos poniendo especial énfasis, y quiero compartirlo con ustedes, en cuál es la aceptabilidad que tienen nuestros usuarios y usuarias, porque efectivamente tenemos unos públicos tan diversos, tan complejos, pero necesitamos tener esta cercanía a este ciudadano, a esta ciudadana, a estos niños que son sujetos de derecho, ¿no? Entonces, esta mirada que tenemos que tener también sobre ellos, que también puedan tomar decisiones asertivas, acertadas, en el marco de su nutrición, porque no solamente ellos deben recibir lo que el adulto les da, y cuando no estén para que un adulto pueda decidir por ellos, ellos tienen que tener la capacidad también, la información suficiente para tener decisiones que sean valiosas para su propio desarrollo. Entonces, con esto también vamos generando competencias de ciudadanía. Y vuelvo a tomar este tema de que la información y el desarrollo es de ida y vuelta. Entonces, mirarlos también en ese ser de sujeto de derechos y darles también la palabra, escucharlos, es algo que queremos hacer. Tenemos varios retos. Uno de los retos que hemos identificado, por ejemplo, es rápidamente un diagnóstico de cuál es la palatización que tienen nuestros niños, nuestras niñas respecto al azúcar, la sal, las grasas. Y vemos que, por ejemplo, los niños más pequeños que están en inicial, en primero, segundo y hasta tercer grado, tienen una aceptación a una palatización baja de azúcar y de sal. Los niños más grandes y los adolescentes obviamente están expuestos a sabores más dulces, más salados, y entonces empezamos ahí con el diálogo de que no, lo que el programa me da no me gusta. Entonces le dicen, ¿por qué no te gusta? Porque no tiene azúcar, porque no tiene tanta sal, y entonces empezamos ahí también el tema del debate y la reflexión con ellos para que puedan también tomar estas decisiones informadas y cuidado sobre ellos mismos. Voy a cerrar señalando como conclusión algunos de los argumentos que no nos queda duda de por qué es importante el servicio alimentario en las escuelas. En primer lugar, bueno, quiero señalar que es un tema ético y político, porque niños, niñas y adolescentes tienen derecho a esta educación y el Estado debe garantizar el acceso al servicio alimentario para que puedan desarrollarse de manera integral y desenvolverse como ciudadanos plenos. Porque es parte del sistema educativo. El servicio alimentario contribuye a la mejora de la matrícula, asistencia y procesos cognitivos de los estudiantes. Porque también permite el tema del desarrollo humano. La infancia, la niñez y la adolescencia son etapas de vida que consolidan de manera progresiva y determinante hitos en el desarrollo físico, cerebral, sensorial, motor y emocional